So I want to show you this is how I navigate life. I have we talked about computers and all of that, but I, I love working by hand. I love woodworking. Uh, and I have these little notebooks that I get from a particular guy in the Spanish city of Valencia. This is leather bound, and I carry it with me at all times. So it has my compositional ideas sometimes in meetings or when I have a little time to myself. I this is for the piano piece I was telling you about.
This is very good habit. It's like you're keeping a personal journey.
Journaling.
Yeah, yeah. When did you
I
start
recommend.
doing this?
Always, always.
I want to go back to the silence. Sometimes I found silence to you is another instrument.
Yeah,
How do you think the pacing of the silence? For example, how do you stretch? How do you puncture into a phrase?
yeah. Uh, Adorno says that
Mm.
late Beethoven, silence is where the piece turns its uh, it reaches like the heights of its expressivity. Um, so for me, like because you asked about pacing, which is really important, there is a sense of rhythm that comes from figures, like a dotted figure, like a long versus short, right? But there is also a higher sense of rhythm that comes from the metabolism of a piece, like how fast ideas unfold, um, where things are placed on the time map. So imagine like a kind of rhythm that is like based on the watch, and a kind of rhythm that comes from just observing nature throughout the whole year. So when I design a piece, I am actually very, very aware of how those moments of silence or the other events of the piece are placed on the timeline of the piece. So this creates a sense of macro rhythm
Mm.
that is very consciously predetermined, and it has a particular kind of expressive narrative arc. But for me, like putting those things on the
Mm.
timeline is really really important. I have many different ways of doing it. Sometimes I it emulates kind of like a human breath, where those sounds accumulate towards the end. Sometimes they accumulate in the middle.
Mm.
Sometimes uh, uh, they appear, then disappear, and then they come back.
Mm. Mm.
But all of these timings are very carefully
Mm.
constructed. I actually spent most of my time goes to researching sound.
Mm.
The next most important decision is this idea of micro rhythm,
Mm.
macro rhythm.
Mm. Would you want to go a little more details in terms of the compositional techniques? Because a lot of pieces I realize it deals with a lot of intensity, but also vulnerability in
Yeah.
very delicate and microwaves.
Yes, that is true. And actually, like if you zoom in on those very delicate, vulnerable moments, you will find the microcosm that generates also the more forward, more many times violent moments.
Mm.
Like those are kind of an outcome of some of those decisions.
Mm.
So when I write, as I said, the first thing that interests me is the kind of sounds that I need. And when I have those sounds in mind, I think a lot about what type of things can you do with that sound? What are the parameters of that sound or that playing technique that can be modulated? I never bring to a piece a set of external tools, um, like for example the serials. So they start with a row, and then that can be expressed in a variety of ways. You can be very creative with it. But in my case, I listen to the sound and I repurpose technique or create technique that is necessary for the development of that particular sound. I'll give you an example from what I'm working on right now, which is a piece for your former teacher and his wife,
Mm.
um, Steve and Yukiko Drury, and also Steve's brother Bill, and Symphonic Winds. So for that piece, I was very inspired by the idea of lost cities. I came upon a Byzantine text
Mm.
by a mysterious figure named George Codinus, who is um, describing a pair of singing sculptures that were placed at the port of Constantinople. This text, I landed on this text by accident. It was a wonderful musicologist that asked me for help in translating the text, and then I got into the rabbit hole and started reading all of this description of the lost city of Constantinople, all the marvels that it had before its conquest by the Ottomans. So I found this the description of the pair of statues really interesting. It describes how these two statues were placed on cavernous bases, so that as the waves were hitting them, the pneumatic energy was activating a pair of horns that was at the top of those statues. And those horns were creating very otherworldly, kind of eerie antiphony between the two. So for me, that was all I needed to picture what I'm going to do for these two pianos. They are tuned, they will be tuned a quarter tone apart, and the entire vision of the piece is a Doppler effect. So, when you hear an ambulance passing you by, the pitch falls as it's as it's going further and further away from you. I was thinking about, okay, what are the mechanics of the Doppler effect? What does this idea of this otherworldly resonance between these two pianos, what can it sound like? So I started writing some motifs, and I was thinking about distorted reflections from one motif to the other. Now both of these towers are receiving the same waves or similar waves, but they're not going to express things in the same way. Maybe they're structured in an identical way, but one will be somewhat a distorted mirror of the other. When you're listening, if you're closer to one tower, the other one will seem at a distance. So how do you give this idea of a distance? So all of that becomes technique, right? It gets translated to actual motives, and you study, you see like what is actually happening in situations like this. I listen to waves a lot, like sea waves, and then that's just technical solutions for me. And I think the fact that I've studied technique and I continue to do in other composers, even composers whose aesthetic is not so interesting to me, maybe their technical solutions can offer something that I can use after. So I can find technical solutions. The difficult thing to find is to find a thread.
Yeah.
Once you find the thread, if you are studious and imaginative, you can find the technique.
Yeah. So I think even the motive, it becomes a derivative product to the thread itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the characters you had, which is being very curious and always curious about other fields and always become very motive, you have a very inner motivations, I found. What do you think that comes from?
I grew up in a household that was kind of split between science and music, but it was my father is a musician, my mom is a scientist, chemistry professor, and I think kind of the way my brain works is influenced a lot by my mom, who was always asking questions and was someone who's exceptionally thorough. If you talk with her, she's gonna try to interrogate every single thing that you do. To the point of exhaustion, and that was an attitude that influenced me a lot in life, to want to know now why and how does this work exactly and what happens if you change this. I was also very lucky that my dad, who was a wonderful musician, decided to pursue a job in a very good school in Greece, Athens College. It's a school that my sister and I would have never been able to attend had it not been for my dad to make kind of sacrifice of teaching high school music. It's something that even in the moments where I'm very tired musically and I need a break, I think that basically all this dream that I'm living, it was facilitated by a sacrifice that my dad made. He could have very well pursued a solo career or do things that were more musically enriching to him, but he chose to pursue this path. He did a lot of wonderful things for that school and many other conservatory systems. And that school really promoted a love of knowledge, at least to me. We had teachers that were, like my dad, very accomplished in their fields. They could have very easily be teaching in university or be employed in the industry. or have successful business careers, but they had this passion for teaching. I found their teaching and kind of introduction to the world of ideas really electrifying. Athens, if you're also interested in the world of ideas and the world of letters and arts, Athens is a great place to grow up.
Yeah.
It is there for you to find.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not just the museums and the antiquities, it's also the bookstores. You know, it's also many opportunities to go to interesting lectures, even when I was growing up. There is cinema, there is theater. So if you're open to that and you are willing to pursue it, it's there for you. And when I started my undergraduate studies at Princeton University, for the first time in my life, I had the resources of some of the best libraries in the universe. And that to me was a tremendous playground. Not only do you have the access to these resources, but you have interesting people to talk to. You know, any person that you pick a conversation with has something interesting to say. Even in a field you're not interested in, like finance, for example. If you find the right kind of person who's passionate about it, there might be like a little something there that resonates with you. So I was fortunate enough, because of my parents' generosity towards my sister and myself, I was fortunate enough to have this access to this kind of resources and kind of grow up with a natural sense of curiosity. And also another thing that was really important in our family, in many ways our family was a kind of strict Greek family, where there were expectations for the kids, and like there was definitely discipline in the house. But on the other hand, there was a source of democracy. Like we could all talk about something. It wasn't some kind of dictatorship where the parents decide and the children follow. We could bring anything up, and if your argument was good, you could convince your parents. I think, you know, being interested in this world of ideas also has to do with being exposed in an environment where you can be heard, no matter how stupid or ill-conceived your ideas are. To grow up in an environment where there is space for you to express what you're thinking.
Well, I can say that your father really is into educations. And he certainly knows how to educate his children.
Also my mother, they were very good about that.
Yeah, and also I think one great thing is that before we don't have those social media and the phones, so we like to interact with people, and we think it's fun. But now people become more introverted and more into their own world instead of stepping out of the comfort zones and generate more ideas.
Well, a real relationship entails the element of risk and the elements of sacrifice. Like, you know, every friendship requires for you to kind of pull back some of your egoism, some of your self-centeredness, and give space for the other person. And I think that's something that perhaps needs to be taught today, how to do that organically. But I think there's another danger with an opportunity and a danger that I see in a lot of my conservatory students. When I was growing up, I owned 3 contemporary music scores. Okay, in Greece, I owned Pierrot Lunaire, I owned Lutoslavsky, Livre pour Orchestre, and Schoenberg Opus 19. This was the extent of my musical library. I knew all these scores, and I still know all of these scores by heart, because that's what I had. You know, I think today students have exposure to millions of scores. You can find them in the libraries, or let's be honest, a lot of them unfortunately circulate illegally among students. So basically, from the minute that you express interest in a piece to the moment that you have that score in your hands or in your computer, it's just a few minutes. And unfortunately, that creates a certain kind of confusion about the difference between exposure and knowledge. It's very different to say that I listened to 10 pieces today with a score. Very different to say that I studied them and I actually know them. That requires a little bit of distance and isolation and very serious engagement with the score. So one thing I want to encourage younger people to do is to kind of separate information from knowledge. These two very, very different things. There's hundreds of hours of difference between the two.
I think one is like you are getting to the core of the onions, and then for information just peel out of the skin from the onions. It's very different. So let's talk some future things. So I know you are a very forward-thinking person, And you know, there is news about MIT. They just launched a master program with computations and music together. How do you view this kind of new programs in the music industry?
Very excited about that world. Um, Computation is also part of my creative practice. Um, for a particular reason, our language in music is a language of symbols, and computers are masterful interpreters of symbols. And what I find quite interesting is to develop a dialogue with computers, not a kind of dialogue where the computer is telling me the next note should be a B flat, but a kind of dialogue where I can define a sphere of interest and then explore solutions that transcend my power of imagination. But these are solutions that I myself have encouraged the computer to find. And what I have found in that practice is that a virtuous cycle can develop between the computer suggesting perhaps solutions that are not obvious to you, because every time you sit at the piano you have muscle memory, right?
We don't count for that.
You know,
But yes.
like let's say for me as a composer who was trained as a pianist, if I'm writing for piano, immediately I have a number of solutions in my fingertips. And these can be good, but they can also be very bad because they can hide other things from you. What if you don't have muscle memory or the auditory memory for something new that you're trying to discover? And computers are wonderful in terms of giving you solutions in terms of that. And then what happens is that because you're exploring this small universe, the computer introduces a much larger universe. Then that opens up your imagination to bigger universes. And there is this dialogue, this virtuous cycle of discovery for yourself, for the computer, and vice versa. This is the part of computation that interests me. The part of computation that I think is ridiculous and will threaten people who are not so thoughtful about music are people that write very generic things. Computers will be able very soon, and in many cases already they can do those better. Then, like I'm thinking of like very generic, for example, film music that is calculated to elicit a particular emotion with the most simplistic types of means. AI can already do that well, and if not better. But AI can never do what I do, or what Helmut Lachenmann does. Or like the great American pioneers, like it will never be able to get close to Morton Feldman. It will never have this kind of things. This will require a human, always someone who thinks both in a technical way but in a humanistic way as well. So I'm very interested in this kind of world. It's very exciting. But what I want to be honest about with young composers who want to pursue it, but also young computational scientists who want to pursue it, you will never find a computer science person who's not interested in music.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, and also I started teaching a course, an introduction to computer assisted analysis and composition at NSC. Musicians, all kinds of musicians, performers, improvisers, composers, of course, they take to programming like fish to water. We live in a language of symbols, so we can do this kind of things really easily. But I think composers will need to understand that engaging with computation in a serious way will require a period of making music and computation much, much, much harder. They have to really learn how to program, they have to really learn how it works. It's not just that it will offer easy, quick solutions so you can write more music. If you really want to do it well, it will require a lot of sitting on something and understanding it and talking to other people, and vice versa. A lot of computational scientists, for example, like I hear many times, like, here's an imitation of Bach, and we listen to it as musicians and we say, okay, that's ridiculous, it's really stupid. I think they also need to talk to us to understand some of the more important nuances and rules of this beautiful art form that has been evolving for a while. So I think MIT is uniquely situated to offer programs like that, because you have a lot of musicians who are also trained in computational science and a lot of very powerful computational scientists who are also interested and knowledgeable about music. The question is how we as conservatory people, and I've chosen to be in conservatory. I don't ever want to work in a place that is not a conservatory or that does not have a conservatory program attached to it. this is my happy place, you know. Um, the question is how we in conservatories understand that for us to survive, we must be part of this ecosystem also. 19th century type conservatories will not survive in the next 20, 30 years. We must embed ourselves in this broader burgeoning ecosystem, which is really fantastic. We need them and they need us, you know, and we need leaders that have this kind of imagination to figure out how all the artistic institutions that are on Huntington Avenue, how they will be connected in this broader ecosystem that is going to redefine what, for lack of a better word, the market for art, what the marketplace of ideas is for art. We need to have the imagination to see those ecosystems.
I think this is going to be a very brighter and more positive ways, and I can see that it's gonna take some time for sure, but I hope some of our young generation of listeners will take into those advices into account of their studies. Yeah, so thank you so much for your talkings, and it's just so fascinating to see how you reimagine the world of the music and reconstruct it. And to our listeners' ears, we construct our own memories, construct our own stories into your music as if it's memory, as if it's a collective stories of the humankind. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the very interesting discussion.